Welcome! In this video we will look at doing field validation on a form with the PowerBasic Windows Compiler. This is the state of the application we left it in at the end of the last video, with a dialog on screen and an embedded browser control. Now my intention was to design a chart program. We would have a form with a number of controls on screen allowing you to set values within this chart control. Unfortunately, the scalable vector graphics tag within HTML, SVG, which I intended to use, doesn't appear to be functional within an embedded HTML control. It doesn't appear to support that particular type of tag. So what we're going to do is we're going to still have the dialog on screen into which you can put all the values for your chart, but we're going to launch it inside a standard browser, whatever your default browser happens to be, rather than having it on the chart itself. So, how are we going to do that? Well, first of all, we'll have to get back to the form. So if we have a look at our form, and in here we have all the objects we're appearing on screen, and further down we're actually setting up the preparation for the HTML control. Now what I'm going to do with this is this section of code here, which is involved with displaying that control on screen, I'm going to comment out. Comment that out and we run our program again. Our dialog comes up but without the control, which is exactly what we're after. Now what we're going to do now is we're going to change the dialog so that we can actually get some input from the user. So if we go back to our forms designer, and in here we're going to put some dialog controls up on screen to elicit information from the user. Now the first thing we'll want to know from the user is what the name of the chart, what the title of the chart is going to be. And we'll call that label title. We'll make that blue for highlighting. And we will want a text box into which the user can actually put the title of the chart. And we will name that text box txt title. Now, that's a nice easy one. The other boxes we'll want on screen initially will be the size of the chart. Oh, and we'll make that one blue as well. And ideally we should have all these lined up. Now since we know this width one is definitely going to be a number, what we can do, we can actually go into the styles and we can tick the want number value. Very bottom one. We can take the ES number, which ensures that you can only key numbers through 0 to 9. Doesn't accept minuses, pluses or decimal points, but for the purposes of what we're doing, that's exactly what we're after. We've put a default value in of 0. Plus, the other thing we can do is we can center the text on screen inside the control, and I think since we want that a wee bit smaller, we will reduce the size of it on screen just to keep it nice and tidy. So we got chart width, we will just copy that and we will change that to chart height. Generally, it's a good idea to keep the names of your controls fairly close to what they actually are. It makes it much easier finding them in code. And we'll change that to text height. Now, obviously, before the user presses the build a chart button, what we want to do, we want to validate the information that's on screen. And this is what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be doing the validation of what they have on screen. You will need validation routines for almost every dialog you design, so it's good to get these in as groundwork. So we've got 3 values on the screen. Now we know the title of the chart has to contain something, so it can't be blank, and we know the chart width has to be non-zero. Now you may want to set upper limits to the chart width and height, but you'll certainly want the user to put some value in. So if we save that now, well, before we save it, one thing you may want to do, when a user has a dialog on screen, they can use the tab button on the keyboard to navigate around the screen. Now, as you put controls onto a screen, they will appear in order in the form definition. And the order appearing is the order the tab works in. But you may add a control later on, somewhere in the middle of that, and you may want to reset the tab order. Now this control at the very top lets you set the tab order. Now when you click on each of the things you want the tab order in, I want that to be the first one, that to be the second, that to be the third, the button to be the fourth, and the exit to be the fifth. And if you close that now, and if we clicked on the test and press the tab key, you'll find it will now navigate around that quite happily. So anytime you need to reset your tabs, just go up to the tab order editor and click on it. Now what I'm also going to do is I'm going to move these buttons up slightly. We will probably not need such a big dialogue as we have already. So reducing the size of our dialogue will give us more space on screen for other things. Right, okay, so we save that now. Go back to our original code. And yes, of course, the dialogue, of course, is renamed all the things we changed. Now I think since we're not planning on making any changes to the attach menu, we will take it away from PB forms to control, and we will move the call from attach menu from inside the bit that it controls. So I think we'll take both of those functions, calls, and we'll move them outside PB forms to stop PB forms doing that every time we drop into it. So we go into here, we'll take all these references out. PB forms is very useful for actually creating these in the first place, but once they're created, you may never have to touch them again. Right, that's fine. So if we run our application now, it should quite happily display the data on screen, and our tabs are working perfectly. So how do we go about validating information on the screen? Now when you click the build a chart button, that's when you want your validation to happen. So that will be inside the event handler. So if we have a look at the event handler itself, here's our event handler. Now we have a number of things in here. If we look inside the command, this is where the objects on screen that you've put there will actually be controlled every time an event happens. Now we have somewhere down here a build a chart button. This is the code that will be executed when that button is actually clicked. Now at the moment it will run off and do the build a report function. Now we don't want it to do that just yet because we've effectively taken the control off the screen, so what we will do is we will comment this out for the moment. We will come back to that piece of code, but we want our validation to happen in here before we do the build report. So how do we do that? Now the easiest way to do it is have one function do all the validation. So have a function called validate form. Now it's going to have to pass some information off to that, not least of which is the form handle. And you would want to be turned true or false. If it's true, then we can call all the code to actually do the build a report. Otherwise, something on the form has actually failed. Now what I'd like to do on here is to do something clever from our point of view, is to allow the user to see what it is the form validation is actually having issues about. So we'll want to highlight on screen what the problem is. There are a few ways of actually doing this. Well, let's create the validate function form first. Otherwise the program would not run. So there's the stub for our validate form. If we run our program now, just have a look at the dialog again. And there is a dialog. Now we want this field to contain something, so we'll have to test to see if there's anything in the field. If there's nothing in the field, then that's an error. So how do we highlight that to the user on screen? Well, we have the title, which at the moment is coloured blue. If the field fails its validation, we could change the colour of the label above the box to be red to indicate the fact that this is actually a problem. We could do exactly the same with the other two fields. Now, to indicate to the user that these fields are mandatory, we may want to put something on screen to highlight the fact they're mandatory, but we'll cover that later. We'll do the validation bit first. So what do we want to do then? We want to actually call this routine, and in this routine we want to test for validation. So within this validate function, we know there's going to be a whole range of objects on screen you wish to validate. So what we'll want to do is we'll want some kind of generic approach to actually validating them all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an array to contain some numbers, and these are going to be handles to the objects on screen we're actually going to validate. Now let's just, for the sake of argument, create this as a multi-dimension array, and we'll create it with basically two elements. And what we will do is to populate this with the values we're interested in actually doing. Now we know we want to validate the first thing on the screen. So the first thing on the screen, if we nip into our Forms Designer and have a look at this field is going to contain the title of the chart. So if we double click on that and get the ID name of it. So that's going to be the thing we're validating, and the thing that's going to contain the colour is the title of the chart, which is currently blue. So if we highlight that and get its name, so this will be the field to be validated. And this second object is going to be the field to display colour error. And then what we will do is we want to basically check through all the values we've actually done to make sure that they are correct or not correct. So for that we will want a for next loop. And we can use the U-bound control, which we've used in previous videos. So we've got total variable, which is going to let us cycle around this, and then within this loop we want to test. So the first thing we want to do is to control get text from the dialog, which we passed in as a handle to this function. And the first thing we're doing is getting the 0 element of this array, which in this case is going to be the text within that particular control. And we'll pass that to a variable which we can actually test. So having got the value of the variable, what we want to do is we want to test to see if it's actually got any text in it. Now, just in case the user's actually going to put a few spaces into the field, if we use the trim $ command, we can actually trim any spaces out to ensure that there is actually some text within that field. So, if there's nothing in the field is blank. Now, we're treating this as a mandatory field, so they must have something in it. Field is populated. So what do we do if the field is blank? Well, we'll want to return something to the user to indicate the fact that the field is indeed blank. So I think we'll probably need, as well as the dialog, we'll need a value to go back to the user, and we also want to put focus onto that field. So what we'll do is we'll create a new variable called long focus. We'll also want to give a string of text to the user to explain what the error actually is. So we'll call that Mac error. Well, I'm going to use Mac error because I want to use a macro to actually display this generically on the screen for the user. So that's 2 extra variables we've added. So if we actually do have that, what we want to do is we want to set the Mac error string to be mandatory item is empty. Now we need to somehow to put the actual text on the screen. Now we'll do a pop-up. I think we'll do a menu box on the screen for that one. But we want to change the colour of the label to be red rather than blue. So we're going to use a control set colour command, and we want that to be the number 1 element of the array, which is this one. And we'll set that quite easily to red, foreground, and the standard background. Right, okay. Now in order to make sure that redraws in real time, we'll do a control redraw, just to make sure it redraws. And we'll steal the same information. So we're going to set the colour to red, and we're going to redraw the control to make sure the user gets to see it. Now the other thing we can do is to reset our other variable, the focus ID, to be equal to the text box that we want the user to actually input the value to. Saves the user trying to figure out which one it is. And at that point, we will exit the function. because even if there are more things to check, this first one has failed, therefore we will come out. Now, should the value be populated, we'll want to make sure that the colour is actually blue, because the user may have gone in initially, not put it in, validation fails, they then click it again, it will still be red, so we want to make sure it's actually blue. So we'll take these 2 lines of code, we'll put them in, and we will make our text blue rather than red. Now if we get this far down, after all the controls are actually tested, now we've only got one control here, we want to make the function equal to true. Since it's got to the end, therefore nothing's failed, so the value is true. Otherwise up here, the function value would be false. It would be false by default, but let's just put false in just to make sure we know what we're doing. So, having done that, we need to change the call to this to have 2 extra variables. So let's go back to where the form validation is actually called. Now we know we wanted 2 extra variables. We wanted the focus ID and we wanted the text. So in here we will want the str mark error. Let's just fold that round. Now these are obviously 2 new variables we've not seen in this particular function before, so we're going to have to prep them up at the top of the function. So having prepared them, we'll go back down to where we're calling it. So if this is true, then the form is validated. Otherwise, we want to do something. We want to tell the user that things have not worked out terribly well and they have to do something. So a nice easy way of doing this, because you may have many different forms on your application to validate. We only have one form in this one, but in some cases you will have many. So what we want to do is we want to put some kind of validation on the screen. Now I'm going to create a macro to actually do this. We'll create that macro in a moment. And the other thing we want to test, if the focus ID does not equal 0, then we want to set the focus. So suppose if we want this to do this properly, before we validate the form, we're probably best ensuring that focus ID is 0 before we go in. So if the focus ID isn't 0, then we want to set the focus for the dialog to that particular control. So there's a nice control set focus command, and it needs to know the dialog and the handle of the control, which happens to be hFocusID. Right, okay. Now if that's the case, we should be all set. All we need to do now is to create this new macro. So let's create this new macro. Now a macro is very useful in that when you compile the program, the code within the macro and end macro tags is automatically pasted in for you. So in this case we are getting one piece of information coming in, which case is the error, and we want to display a message box to the user and we will add in what the actual error is. And perhaps in a carriage return line feed in there. Now this puts the text into the message box, but we want to highlight it even more by using a couple of variables that the message box actually supports. If we have a look at the message box, there are a number of different parameters you can actually put in here for the style. Now we want to give the user information in fact it's been an error, so we can use perhaps the stop sign. So we copy that one and put that in, and we also want to make sure that the user can't do anything until such times as they actually hit the OK button. So we'll put it in as a task modal, and then on the final thing we'll put in is we will put in the title of the message box. Right, now assuming we've coded all this correctly, let's just come out of the Forms Designer and back into here and do a quick compile. And what have we missed? Yes, I think I know what I've done here. Right, okay, we're close. Did we miss H focus ID? I thought we created that. No, we didn't. We missed creating that because it's focus ID we passed. So we passed the wrong variable name. Right, okay, let's try compiling now. Close. String operand. What's it complaining about? Yes, we're just folding the line. We're not actually adding a string. Let's try that now. I think we're there. Right, it's compiling cleanly. Good. Okay, now if we hit the Build a Chart button, it will quite correctly pick up the fact we haven't put the title in, and it shows up in the message box, which won't let us do any clicking anywhere else until we actually click on this. So it's telling us the validation is failed on the form with a mandatory item is empty. The field it's failed validation will be indicated in red, which it is. And when we click OK, it sets the focus to that field. So if we populate that, I see what the problem is. What it's doing is we've set accelerator keys up for L and S, so if the letters L and S actually pop up, it's getting in the way. So I think we may have to turn our accelerators off. So we will comment out the attached accelerators, and if we run that now, it'll do it quite nicely. So we've now put a value into the enter title of the chart box. We click on Build a Chart and it's not doing anything, it's not complaining in any way. So we've validated the first control on the screen, which is quite happily working. What we want to do is validate the next two. Now if we go back to our validation routine, there's a validation routine here. Now we've got the first control handled quite happily. We'll want to add on two more controls. Now the only problem being is what it's doing in here is it's testing to see if the value is blank. Now the next field we have will always have a value in it, but we want it to be non-zero. So we want a way of telling the difference between these two types of fields. So the easiest thing to do is we will just extend this array to have 3 elements. And what we will put in here is some kind of an indicator which is a number and which is a string. So let's create a custom constant called valString. Let's Let's make it all capitals just for the fun of it. And then what we'll do, we haven't created this yet, so we'll nip back to the beginning of our application where we set all our constants up. And where to put them, we'll put them after the slot. Right, after all PB forms constants are in, we want a validation string and we want a validation number. The values you put into these aren't relevant, it's just really the this we're actually testing. So if we zip down to where that was, so we've set that to be this value we want to test. Now this will quite happily pick up the value in the control. We then want to actually do our check based on the type. So what we're doing is we want to test based on the new element we've just added, which was number 2. Yep, number 2. And then we'll put a case statement in to see if it's string, then we do this piece of code. And then what we'll do is for this section here, we will just indent that twice. So if it's a string, then we do the validation we've already created. And we'll do the other one, which was the val number. And we'll validate based on that. So if it's a number, we'll be doing some of the same kind of things. So we'll basically just borrow all this code because it's doing mostly what we want to do, and we'll chop it out slightly. So what we're after, rather than a trim, we want to do a value. So if the value of what comes out of that field is 0, and we want to say mandatory item is 0, and we don't want any zeros, so we're doing the same thing. We're basically setting the text of the label to be red, we're redrawing it, we're setting the focus ID to the field which needs to be populated, and we're coming out. So if the field is non-zero, we're doing all the same things. So all we have to do now is to create 2 more sections to handle the 2 additional controls we're putting on screen. And we'll just up the numbers in the arrays, and we'll make our array now 3 rows. So we want to pick back the value of each of those controls. So let's just save that. We'll nip back into our forms designer and we'll have a look at these controls. Now one's called long width. So the actual name containing that is that. And we'll know the other one is going to be called something remarkably similar because we called it height. And the label is going to be width, and we know it's going to be a number we're after, and the same in here. This is going to be a number, and we know this is going to be height. So we now have 3 items on screen we're going to validate. The string that's contained within the title, the number that's contained in the width, and the number that's contained in the height. Now that should work quite nicely. Let's come out of our form designer because we haven't changed anything on the form, and we'll try running this again. And there's our form on screen. So if we hit the build a chart, it will complain about the enter the title. So we'll put a title in. If we hit build a chart again, it complains about the chart width, and it says the mandatory item is 0, which is fine. So we'll put a value in there. Hit build a chart again, and it complains about the height. Now this might be quite irritating to the user, but from the point of view of the designer of the application, you now have a way of actually validating all of the items on screen. Now the form is validated. So this is the first stage of our validation. What we're going to do in the next video is we're going to take this information and we're going to create a chart with this. But that's all for today. Thank you for watching.